I can change that, but I'm expecting still a few other guests, so I mean that's okay. So greetings and welcome to our live stream. Oh, now I see that StreamYard now has an improvement. We can actually see how many people are watching us live, and right now it's
I can't
just
see that though.
Yeah, let me up. Hey, glad to have John here with us. Amazing.
Hello.
You know, John, you're muted. You're muted.
Hi, Judy. Been hearing great things about you from Paul.
Nice to meet you.
Yes, Judy is our guest star, and I'm so happy that to have her with us today on this live stream. And it's really great to be here. And I look like a child with a new toy. You know, this live stream, LinkedIn live stream is really exciting for me. And I'm so pleased that to have Judy Rees here with us today, and also John Wells from Australia. And John is making an incredible sacrifice to be with us because it's 1 a.m. where he is right now in Melbourne, right, John?
In Canberra, yes.
In Canberra. Sorry, I it's confusing all these locations. So welcome and welcome to our viewers that are spending some time in their busy afternoon to watch us. So let's do a round of intros. Judy, do you want to introduce yourself briefly for our viewers?
Oh, well, what I say depends on who's listening, of course. So there are two things that I'm known for. The current one is that I do loads and loads of online events and teaching people to take their highly involving, highly participative events into the online space. So today, for example, I was working with the Norwegian Refugee Council, helping to facilitate their strategic forum for their the group in Lebanon. You know, all challenges that they've had in Beirut with the explosion, as well as all the political stuff they've been going through, and all the and COVID as well, all of that. And they were having a strategic workshop, and we were helping to facilitate that. These kind of things are what I've been doing a lot of since lockdown. Way back when, in the time before, I was probably mostly known for co-authoring a book on clean language called Clean Language, Revealing Metaphors and Opening Minds. And clean language is something that underpins my practice as a facilitator and also as a remote facilitator and as a trainer. I think some of the amazing insights of David Grove, who created Clean Language, can really inform our work when we're facilitating, whenever we're working with a group of people.
That's amazing, really, Judy, because now I'm discovering you that, by the way, for the ones who have not really realized, Judy is, I would say, the founding mother of virtual facilitation and virtual meetings. Way beyond COVID, she was already doing extremely
I don't think
engaging
I can claim
meetings.
the founding mother, but I was early.
Yeah, definitely she is, and I've just now discovered that clean language, which is an incredible concept and a surprise for me, was already part of her practice before she actually stepped in the virtual space and actually practicing as a brilliant virtual facilitator. Would you like to be called virtual facilitator or digital facilitator, Judy?
Online facilitator is what I tend to go for. Digital facilitator for me would include the facilitation of text-based conversations and all those kind of things, whereas mostly what I'm focusing on is the live online part.
Fantastic.
Video calls.
Video calls. Yeah, that's a good designation for what you do. Definitely online facilitation, amazing. And how about you, John? Do you consider yourself to be an online facilitator?
That's a leading question.
It is. So you know about clean language too.
Yeah, probably not. In as much as this tool, while not new, is certainly new in the way that a lot of people are using it, And I must admit, I feel humbly that it's a journey, because I think we're all not only all learning how to use it, but we're all experiencing others using it differently. For me, for my part, as you know, some of the work we do is often around large-scale projects and programs, and so I'm constantly curious to see where there may be people or organizations that are using online facilitation, digital facilitation, whatever you might like to call it, to enable programs at scale, conversations at scale. That, I think, is one of the more promising dimensions of this arena, because I think for all of the ways in which some of us talk about being Zoom fatigued these days, and a little over the tech and wanting to reconnect with people more face to face, more in person, I think at the same time the digital tech makes it possible, as we're doing here. We're talking from Australia and the UK and Spain, right? And there's however how many people watching. And I think the opportunities of that are quite substantial. And we're really going to need to call on those opportunities as we all recover from the current crises.
Definitely. So, John, how do you consider that this situation is impacting the life of the traditional, I would say, group workers, like many of the participants that I hope are watching us now?
I would say that one of the big changes is around hybrid interaction. I think what we're finding, I think there'll be quite a few people around the world who are finding that their city is not currently under COVID-19 lockdown, and they are starting to gather again and convene conventional discussions. Sadly, there will be some people watching, of course, who are at the other end of the spectrum, where their city, their agency, their organization is under lockdown. One of the things I think we're going to be seeing for another possibly 6 months to a year yet is that as we see different waves of this crisis coming back again to various locations, as we convene conversations, unless they're solely dedicated to a city, I think, or a single location, I think we're going to, as a result of the last few months, see more dialogue conveners or hosts really want to engage people from other locations. I think a lot of people have gotten a taste of it. A lot of my peers and colleagues in government and elsewhere around the world realize that when they have a conversation, that doesn't just have to be the people in the room can be much larger. So I think there is going to be a challenge for all of us who are facilitators or hosts or enablers of dialogue to understand how to do that most frustrating of forms of facilitation, which is that hybrid, where some people are in the room and some people are outside. I think that's certainly a big challenge and a big opportunity. Very quickly, the other thing I do think, though, is that we are all going to have to learn to flex our digital muscles a little and learn how these digital tools can help us do this more elegantly. And secondly, the other E, more equitably, to engage people who don't have access, if only because of broadband limitations or what have you. And I think that's going to be, I think, Judy, you will know, I know from friends in London and elsewhere that there are some wonderful programs around the far north, the remote areas of the UK, as there are here in Australia, where there are limitations around broadband, and sometimes it's not so much a broadband limitation, but one of social equity. People simply don't have, you might say, the digital familiarity that some of us have. That I think is going to become both a challenge and an opportunity.
Yeah, there's a
Fantastic.
brilliant opportunity and a brilliant challenge. I've been chatting to somebody actually just today, and I'm going on to another call after this one about this whole challenge and opportunity around equity and accessibility. If we look at it on a global scale, it's not just obviously the Anglophone white rich world has got a huge advantage in this space.
Yes.
So but at the same time, here in the Anglophone white world, we are reducing inequities. So on a call the other night, I was working with a local council in the UK. It was a replacement for their community conference that would usually be held in a big leisure centre in the seaside town that this was all about. But we did it online instead. And we had people on there there was a couple in their 90s who were able to attend the online edition, who could never have dreamt of going to the leisure centre because they couldn't travel. They just aren't able to go out in the evening to go to an event. But going online, they could do it. It also makes evening meetings, much more accessible to a lot of women who might have caring responsibilities and so on.
Absolutely.
But then at the same time, we've got the problem of, right, how do we involve people from Africa? How do we involve people from areas of the Middle East where there are all sorts of interesting challenges? It's absolutely fascinating and really exciting to see how how some of these things are being tackled. The guy I was talking to this morning is involved in a UK government-funded research program to work out what can be done, because we can all see that there's this great opportunity to, from a climate point of view, to continue the great thing of having more of our workshops online, but we don't lose the magic of being able to organize an in-person workshop in a community center on an estate. All of that stuff.
All of that's both possible and, as we say, challenging. Just to pick up on something you said there, Judy, that the issue of how different cultures respond to this time is something that has come to our attention a lot. We've find with Indigenous Australians, it's a confronting challenge for some, and yet for some of the younger generations, they're very hip to using the digital tools, particularly if it's mobile. Equally, there are, of course, to echo what you said, in some parts of the world, participating in a face-to-face video call is culturally confronting, and people prefer to turn their webcams off, which is in turn confronting for the facilitator. We were asked to do a piece in an area of North Africa recently where this was to be the case, and very, very challenging. But that said, again, to echo your optimism, we've found that over the years, particularly around work in the area of digital government, there are some communities around the world, some nations indeed, that are leapfrogging the West precisely because they don't have the legacy issues of our technology infrastructure, and they're able to, jump on board the digital, speedwagon and be able to actually move ahead of us in some ways. I think all of us know of the, some of the wonderful stuff being done in Estonia, for example, a very small nation that in a sense was behind the eight ball not that long ago, but now is well ahead of nations like the United States and others around, service delivery online. So it is possible that particularly smaller communities, states, can move ahead at this time. And it's going to be interesting, I think, particularly in the public sector area. For those of you who do a lot of work with government and government agencies, it's going to be interesting to see the challenge facing, in my opinion, government organisations who have been, I'd like to say as a personal view, hogging the digital tools to create more internal backroom efficiency for government, whereas now we're seeing, and citizens are starting to expect, that these tools should be available to create more front of house effectiveness in service delivery to citizens.
That's great. That's so great. We're having a wonderful number of comments from Rita Pulika, Jeffrey London, and Charlotte Divley that are watching us live. By all means, please use chat to have some questions to these two brilliant speakers that I am. My role today as a moderator is to be here so quiet and listen. But anyway, Judy, up to you, because I think John has been talking a little bit more than you. Let's do the balance now. So tell what will be the ideal question, Judy, that you would like me to ask you?
Ooh, good question. I think it would be something about, I know, Judy, I notice you've been talking a bit less than John on this call so far. Is there something interesting about that you'd like to talk about? As you know, there's a whole bunch of research about the fact that women are less likely to speak in any context where women are in the minority. And here I am, woman in forming only a third of this community. And am I doing what the book says I should be doing, which is talking less? I think it strikes me as interesting that is observably so. And one of the pieces that I was reading on this subject today suggests that one of the things that we as facilitators could be doing is calling that out and saying to people, saying to whole groups, notice that women are statistically less likely to speak up, and therefore men hold back, please. But I'm not at all sure about that. I think that's not the way forward, but I'm not sure what the right way forward is. And I think that typically online we can do more deliberate things to make sure that more people are heard. So things like that, I mean, they're almost silly things, but they're important things, like ask everybody to answer a particular question in the chat, but not to hit return until you as the facilitator so that everybody gets to speak at once. Similarly, using anonymous tools like Mentimeter or Slido or any of those kind of things. Would using those kind of tools increase the ability of the people less likely to speak to get involved in the conversation? When we're in the room together, we can't use those tools. Here online, we can use Mentimeter and Slido in any context, but it feels very awkward, and it also, if you've got to grab a smartphone, that again makes it more likely that the men will grab the smartphones and put the thing in. The women are more likely to hold back. So I just wonder how much of that is a potentially really big advantage in the online context. I'll stop ranting.
No, rant.
Just to add something to spice up a little bit the discussion, I'm reading a lot about brain, how the brain works, and it happens that our brain is highly determined by the genetic composition of our own existence. And the fact is that genetically, women are so different from men. It's incredible. Having two X chromosomes can have a huge impact on redundancy. And women are, I will hate to say this, but theoretically much better facilitators than men. John, would you like to comment on that? Women are better facilitators than men, genetic by genes composition.
Oh, you're going to get me into deep trouble here. You are. I'm just looking to my right because my partner in crime, as you know, Paul, is here with me and has.
Oh, Allison is here. Okay.
Allison is here. Look.
So now we have parity, Judy.
Exactly. Exactly.
Can I jump in and bring kind of some balance in here with a different perspective? I'm not sure that I would say better. I would certainly say different. And I think that partly that comes from a sense of being quite alert to the human dynamics of any given situation, perhaps in a different way to some of our male counterparts. But in any case, I think, and just taking on board some of what I've been hearing so far, while we are both given the opportunity, but also in some ways, forced into using digital platforms more creatively and more extensively than perhaps we might otherwise have done, we still all need to bring the same intent into those spaces that we would in a face-to-face context that we'd normally be accustomed to. So while it's different tools, I think it's about having the same intent and being purposeful and deliberate in designing those spaces in the same way you would design a space in a face-to-face context. And that's being aware of things like, as been discussed already, the use of digital tools like mobile phones might create friction for some kinds of participants, but actually might enable others, like some of the introverts or people who aren't necessarily comfortable with either a face-to-face or an online direct interaction, but are more than happy to contribute otherwise. So I think as facilitators, it's on us to be really intentional and really mindful of the different mechanisms and the different ways of encouraging interaction that we can use, while being really alert to ways that those mightn't be as useful as we think they are in that particular time.
Oh, definitely. We're having here some questions by Martin Adelgaard, a good friend and a facilitator that I have met a few weeks ago. Virtually met, and we almost become friends. So it's incredible how this pandemic is going to make lots of virtual friends all over the world. Martin asks about using more asynchronous platforms with more AI features to support equal and unbiased contributions. What will be your views on the using of AI in order to balance the contributions that are typed asynchronously?
I'm very keen to answer that if I can have a go. And I tie that also into the comment by Circle Indigo that actually in the last 3 online sessions I've facilitated, there's been more women than men. I actually think it's quite apparent that women are finding video conferencing more accessible, once they get used to it, more accessible than certain other tools. It's also been demonstrated very frequently that using text-based asynchronous tools tends to discourage women from participating. And AI, we don't yet have research to support it, but the suspicion is that AI will tend to favour English-speaking and American, Australian and British accents, for example. It's also been shown that some of the AI speech-to-writing things were much better at interpreting what men said than what women said. I mean, there are all sorts of funny videos on these subjects, like the one about the Scottish guys stuck in the lift because the voice-activated thing won't respond to a Scottish accent. But the fact is that the tools, the bulk of these tools, have been created by men, for men, and by white Anglophone men, for white Anglophone men. So I don't know what your experience has been, but I do an activity at the beginning of sort of small group activity where everybody in the group has to throw the ball to the next participant, and then they say the opening thing, whatever the opening thing is. And it's quite observable that the one or two people who won't turn their cameras on get the ball last. But the people who get the ball just before those people who don't turn the camera on at all are the ones who can't be seen. There are a couple of reasons that people can't be seen. One is because they've got the light behind them, and so that they've got the witness protection scheme going on. But the other group of people who have that experience are dark black-skinned people. Because the cameras, well, whether they're designed to be like that or whether it's an accident of the fact that they were designed by white men, the cameras don't pick up black features very well. So deep black skin is not very visible in these environments. And that's a disadvantage. So when we're designing in the room spaces as facilitators, we're already very aware of the way that different things work, windows, chairs, tables, flip charts. We know how that stuff works. Here, we're constantly being given new tools to play with, but we don't know what they're going to do to equity. We don't know what the effects of diversity are going to be of using, for example, Microsoft Teams instead of Zoom. There will be effects, but we don't, and the research will come many years down the line. We don't know.
True.
Yeah, absolutely. In what way technology can be an equalizer? I have here a comment from Gary Austin. So if participants are actually interacting via their laptop, tablet, would this be an equalizer in your opinion, Judy, and then also John and Allison? I
would say generally yes, but let me cede the floor to John and Allison.
John and Allison, up to you now.
My comment would be that, like a lot of other areas of communication, it's context sensitive. That it's not so much the device, but if you think whether it's desktop or laptop, I think the context versus mobile is radically different. A lot of people feel the tablet, the iPad has created a middle ground there somewhere, but I'm not sure that's true. I think there is a world of difference between mobile, but also the smartphone, essentially. That's, smart tech is just not as effective and usable in a lot of communities around the world, as we know. And so we are widening a certain kind of disadvantage, a developmental disadvantage, at a time when we need to be flattening as much as possible those inequities.
I think the other thing, if I can take the liberty of combining those two questions together, because I'm keen to circle back to the part of the question from Martin, I think. Yes, Martin, who was talking about more asynchronous platforms, and to come back to this idea of that we have been experimenting with a lot for quite a long time now, is this idea of these hybrid experiences where you might have some synchronous activity that might be video, or it might be a mix of live text chat or something like that. And then you have an asynchronous, it might be over the course of a day or a week or a couple of weeks, which also allows for time for reflection, time for people to gather together and have an offline interpersonal conversation, and then come back into a synchronous mode again. I think it makes sense for us as facilitators learn to hone our craft and our skill set in these ever-evolving times, and all of this fire hose of new tools and capabilities coming at us, what feels like every week, is to use those in such a way that best serves the intent, my word again, of what the outcome of the conversation or the facilitation or the dialogue is about. And that we shouldn't necessarily expect that a single kind of platform or a single experience or a single set of digital tools will do the job for everybody in the same way, and that we can't rest on our laurels and just, assume that that's going to be the case. And so I like this idea, and always have, of the asynchronous, and mixing that up, and which also then allows people who aren't comfortable with the tools or can't participate for whatever reason, whether it's, your child is trying to do homeschool in the background unusually, that you're not used to, or, you don't have time, competing priorities, for us to be able to create those kinds of spaces deliberately and those kinds of engagements deliberately to allow for that drop in, drop out, that pop in, pop out, in such a way that it still delivers an outcome for everybody. Now, that's not easy, but that's part of, I think, what we need to learn to do better.
Oh, definitely. Thank you so much, Allison, John, and Judy. I mean, it's incredible to be among the presence of you guys here and benefiting from your wisdom, the drops of wisdom falling here. And I see the comments also of our viewers are loving your comments and your inputs. But one of the reasons I invited Judy Rees to be here is also because of this concept of clean language. I find it more and more attractive. So now for Judy, then back to Allison and John, because probably you are also practitioners of clean language. Judy, tell what will be, if we had to use a different word to describe clean language instead of using the word clean, what will be the word that we could use?
Well, clean is the hardest concept. Within the clean language community, we argue about this quite a lot. What word could we use instead of clean to mean this whole concept, which is the idea of the facilitator or coach keeping their stuff to themselves and holding a space for the other to express themselves, to explore their inner world, explore the relationship between themselves and another person, to highly respect the other person's personal experience and treat that as sacred, for want of a better word. Now, we can't come up with a single word to express that whole concept apart from this word clean, which we don't like because it has all sorts of implications for being the opposite of dirty, but we haven't got a better one. The other thing about the phrase clean language is it's only got relatively small amount to do with language. But the name was devised by the creator of the thing, David Grove, and it will do for until somebody comes up with something else. But it's a process of inquiry, a process of holding the other person's space, the other person's experience, the other person's inner life as sacred and capable of exploration by questioning and listening. And there's a specific set of very honed down, elegant questions which can be used with precision to ask about the other person's experience. And once you have this skill, then you start to notice when you or when other people are doing something other than being clean. When people are asking a question which could have been clean, but instead they've introduced their own stuff, their own presuppositions, their own opinions, their own prejudices. And you start to think, why did they do that then? But of course, mostly people think they are being clean. It's only when they learn something as precise as the clean language question set, and as soon as they step out of using about 12 questions, they start to ask themselves, why did I do that? People don't realize, they think they're being clean. So James Lawley, who's one of the people who really created clean language into a form that other people could use. David Grove instigated it, but James Lawley is somebody who really polished it. One of the things he does is go through research questionnaires that academics are going to use in their research, and looks at the questions they're putting and says, and goes through and gives them a cleanness rating. And these people, they're academics. They know they are supposed to be just asking the question. But instead, what you find is that they are constantly introducing stuff of their own, assumptions of their own. For example, he was sharing one the other night. He said the question read something like, it was a questionnaire for people who'd had traumatic experiences. And the question was, in what way has this experience changed your life? Well, it's a whopping great assumption there that it has changed the person's life, which will produce all sorts of interesting results. And then all of this is before you even get into the fact that clean language was originally devised to ask about the metaphors that underpin what people are thinking, doing, saying. So when you start to play with metaphor, you do something really interesting, because metaphor is a human universal and it transcends actual language. So in a project I'm working on at the moment, one of the things is that it has to include lots of people from different language backgrounds, but the language of the event is going to be English. So how are we going to incorporate people? And I suggested, well, why don't we get people to draw on a post-it what they meant by their answer, and we'll put them all up on a virtual wall and we'll see what people put there, and we'll get lots and lots of different drawings, because metaphor is one of the ways that you can understand how different people are. If I was to get everybody listening to this to draw their answer to the question, when you're facilitating online at your best, you are like what? Everyone will be different. You'd get some similarities. You'd probably get more than one DJ, for example, more than one disc jockey. But if you asked one of them, what kind of disc jockey is your disc jockey, and the other, what kind of disc jockey is your disc jockey, you'd get different answers. It always happens. As soon as you start to dig into the metaphor, everyone interprets it just a little bit different. And when people get into this, they start to delight in it and discover the joy in finding what's different about the other person. Another pet subject. I'm afraid I've been talking and talking and talking.
No,
that's fine.
Really
John, Allison, do you want to add something to clean language?
I actually had some questions. This is a new concept. Well, certainly the terminology to describe it is new. Although what's interesting is, as I'm listening to Judy and kind of understanding what clean language is about. Judy, do you find that in framing these questions this way at them, it seems like you're trying to get to that most elemental level of understanding and common understanding about the discussion that we're having. Do you find that almost is a real equalizer in the room, that people then have a common grounding to work from? I mean, I'm interested in how it works in practice.
It's less about trying to find a common metaphor or common understanding, and more about appreciating that everybody has an interestingly different understanding.
Right.
and that it's actually impossible to get a common understanding. And that understanding, that it's impossible to get a common understanding, makes it okay for us not to be unanimous. It makes it okay for us to disagree.
Right. So really it is quite clearly leading into that reality that we do all bring our own lenses and our own frames and our own way of interpreting something. And that's almost, if we take that as read, now we can all step forward together and see where we end up. Yeah.
And that concept is deeply embedded in things like deep democracy and Arnold Mindell's work, all of that stuff, that we have to start by appreciating the other for who they are.
So, Judy, let me pose the devil's advocate question. What do you say to facilitators who might say, well, look, I find myself in a situation where a lot of my clients or a lot of the people asking me to do this work are less concerned with the humanity of the room and more with the outcome.
Or worse, the output.
You know, worse the output. But you know, they see that people coming together in a room or whatever the space is about achieving an outcome. And you know, we see this around some very well-intended dialogues around climate change and around inequality and poverty reduction. You know, that these are big problems, and they're quite, you know, systemic. And you know, so what do you say to someone who says we don't have the luxury of, you know, everyone's voice? You know, we have an outcome that urgently needs a solution.
I'd say let's be super clear about what we're doing. So one of the fundamental clean language questions is, what would you like to have happen? Or what would you like to happen? It's encouraging people to speak up and be honest about what they're there for. Now, I have no problem at all with going into, I'm a trainer. If somebody's hired me to teach their people how to run online meetings more effectively, I'm not there to listen to their opinions on whether Zoom is better than Microsoft Teams. There are points at which I'm just going to tell them. But I am clear about why I am there, and I hope that they are clear about why they are there. And within that frame, we can then dialogue. Within our time box, we can dialogue. It's not about trying to go deep on every single conversation with every single person, though clean language can go extremely deep and extremely quickly. It's about showing up authentically, owning your own stuff and acknowledging the other, and saying, right, we've got 10 minutes to get this done.
Well put. Yeah, I agree.
Amazing. Let's also incorporate here one of the comments from our audience. Xian is saying that she find it challenging to co-creating sessions in a series of group dialogues. Would you like to comment on that, Judy?
I think John and Allison should comment on that.
Okay, cool. John and Allison.
So, Sian, I'm going to take a little bit of liberty here and see if I can interpret your question around using a session, like using a session to co-facilitate what should happen next, or whether you mean doing that offline in between. Obviously, they're two really, really different processes and two really, really different engagements. And not everybody is up for the co-facilitation or the co-design and co-creation part. It does require a level of commitment and a level of involvement. And to take some of Judy's really quite powerful sharing of experience there too, it takes quite a bit of honesty and commitment and openness to do that as well, to co-create genuinely with other people. We have a colleague who has this wonderful quote that I'm sure he's purloined from somewhere else, which is that, collaboration is an unnatural act between non-consenting adults. And I'm sure those of us in the facilitation game have experienced that many times over. So for our part, when looking at co-creating, a series of ongoing conversations, we tend to do it as in a smaller unit as we can, with the people who genuinely want to be there, and to do it as iteratively as we can. And that's where, when I was talking before about the synchronous and asynchronous kind of multi-mode approach, that's where we find in our practice anyway, that co-design and co-creation can really, really be a lot stronger, is if you do it in such a way where you have a face-to-face or some kind of synchronous live engagement, where you do have this sort of interchange and people can chat to each other and you can solve problems and ask questions. But then you need to take that out of that space and work in small groups, focus on, particular issues, and then bring them back to the group again. So it's kind of like a bit of, choreography, where you just need to kind of work your way through it. But it does require a certain kind of participation that not all participants are up for, and that you shouldn't necessarily expect that they'll be up for. And
we've also found, and Judy, I wonder your experience on this, that around a moderately long-term project, 6 to 12 months or thereabout, where there's quite a bit of iterative co-design needed, where you really genuinely are collectively looking to move forward and discover the outcome rather than predestine the outcome. In those situations, we find using different channels, not so many that it confuses people, but moving between this kind of live video back to perhaps a more conventional collaboration space, of which I have to confess I'm not a huge fan. But we find that people moving between open dialogue of this kind through to more asynchronous, collab space type dialogue, it gives, as many of you have already commented in your comments, it enables different kinds of personalities, different kinds of energy to come out between those different, in the movement between the spaces.
So, Judy, we're going to throw back to you now, because Shiana's followed up with a clarifying question. Thank you for that. That in this context, it's about asking clean questions versus being able to make suggestions, and how you toggle between those. So, over to you.
It's challenging, particularly so LinkedIn user has asked the question, can you merge both training and facilitation? It's a similar kind of question. So in training, in theory, I should have at least a large number of the answers. But in order to be a learning facilitator, I somehow need to combine some knowledge that I have and need to pass on with helping them to to learn the knowledge. It needs to be the desire to learn needs to come from the participant, not from if only I could unzip your heads and pour in the knowledge that I have about clean language, and if you could unzip mine and pour in the knowledge that you have about long-term engagements with facilitative engagements with organizations, because I don't have that experience, we magically know. But that's not how it works. So when I'm wearing my facilitator hat, my job is not to add content. It's not to add opinion. It's not to add metaphor. However, it is to hold the space, by which I mean put some edges on the thing. Make sure we stay focused on what we're there for, which the people have already agreed is what we're there for. They've already agreed to the time box. So those are my jobs in facilitator mode. When I'm in trainer mode, and I will toggle between them in the course of a 2-hour session, I'll say, well, you've signed up for this course and there are some chunks of information that I need to make sure you've got. And I'll feed them in advance. I'll often share the pure information ahead of time and say, please read this. Because that then gives us the time in the class to have the conversations that need to happen to help people learn what they need to learn. And then my clean language colleague, Caitlin Walker, has a fabulous leading question, Jeffa. Caitlin says, and it's a question that nobody can ever ignore. She says, shall I tell you what I've noticed?
Yeah, everybody wants to know the answer to that question.
And she then reckons she proceeds with permission. But what kind of permission is that permission when the question is that strong? So we can never be completely clean. It's not about being perfectly clean.
Yes.
It's about understanding that clean is a thing, and that we aren't likely to be completely clean. And one of the other bits which is actually quite interesting about is that when you are extremely clean, you actually become more influential, because you make sure that you learn what they want and what they think and what they know before you stick your 2 pence in. And that puts you in a very powerful position in any discussion or negotiation. So there's it's fascinating when you start to dig into this idea of not leading the witness, but actually you always are. Just know to what degree you are and why you're going there.
So, Judy, just to kind of riff off Jeffa's question there, and your example of that, leading question, if you are working with a co-facilitator, or you are, as the leader of a conversation or a group of people, wanting to try and bring this clean question, this clean conversation into play, and you notice someone has, broken that rule, either your co-facilitator or yourself because you weren't paying attention, or you got sucked into it somehow, or one of the participants, how do you call that out in a way that is productive?
It depends what you're trying to achieve. Because 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, 999 times out of 1,000, the purpose of me being there as a facilitator or a trainer is not to teach them to be perfectly clean. What's my purpose? I'm there in pursuit of whatever the group has agreed we're there to do. So it depends. The number of times that I would call out somebody else for introducing an opinion or a metaphor is tiny, but I might later on say something like, I notice we're using the metaphor of a washing machine for this thing we're talking about. What other metaphors might there be?
Right. Yeah. So it's kind of circle back around and make the point without necessarily having to shine a spotlight on it.
Because Caitlin Walker again talks about, as a clean facilitator is not in the business of making your participants wrong. It's not about trying to make other people in the wrong. It's about continuing to hold that respect. And it's interesting, they just talked about this thing as being like a washing machine, but nobody else had said washing machine. I wonder where that came from.
Judy, I'd be interested in your views on what Julio has asked here around maintaining clean language when you've got people from different cultures, different countries, and the metaphor theme becomes, or the metaphor issue becomes
more complex.
Yeah. What's been your experience of that?
One of the most important things about this is that metaphor is a human universal. So the clean language questions have now been translated into bunches of different languages, and they work in a similar way in all the languages. Very, very slight differences in a couple of countries, but fundamentally asking about the metaphors that people use tends to help them to express themselves more clearly. One of the things about metaphor is that metaphor is a one-way street. And the best example I can think of for this is it's a line from a song quoted by James Geary in his book on metaphor. It's love is like a bottle of gin, but a bottle of gin is not like love. So a metaphor always takes an abstract concept and brings it closer to something which is physical reality.
Yes.
And that in a lot of cases, that's a really useful thing to do, because our physical grounding is something that we share across all languages and across all countries, all cultures. And of course, there are differences. The co-author of that book, Clean Language Revealing Metaphors and Opening Minds, Wendy Sullivan, she was South African originally, and she always used to talk about the occasion she was in a big event. The chief executive was speaking at a town hall meeting of the entire company, which of course in South Africa has had, at that time, it's a long time ago now, had all sorts of different races, very specifically identified as races, who had very, very different life experiences. And the chief executive, as the central metaphor for his talk, introduced the idea of cooking a whole salmon in a dishwasher. And that was so far removed from the experience of the lowest paid black member of his staff.
Yes.
There were jaws dropping all over the space. I mean, even it was obvious to everybody that this was awful, terribly culturally insensitive. But luckily, those kind of metaphors emerge when people spend 2 days trying to write a speech. They're not the metaphors that people are using constantly in their speech.
Yes.
And people are using something like 6 metaphors a minute. That's in English, but we find that it's in all the languages it's similar. Because metaphor is the native language of the unconscious mind. Metaphor is how humans think before they put their thoughts into words. So we can use metaphors to build bridges across cultures, across groups, across languages. Though that's often more in theory than in practice, it's hard work. We have to think about it, we have to plan it, we have to do things deliberately, just as we do in any piece of facilitation.
Yeah, definitely. But listen, guys, I would be here for hours with you because we are learning so much from this conversation. This was actually the most amazing moderation I ever had in my life, because I stood here doing nothing and just listening to you asking questions.
Sorry about that.
I couldn't be cleaner in my facilitation. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Just for our viewers, if you are looking forward to learn more about these kind of conversations and facilitation, please join FAC Week in this course of this month of October. I have here a banner just to tell you about FAC Week here. Let me show you is here. And probably John and Allison. Judy, I'm so sorry you're not going to submit the session, but maybe you could join the relay conversation.
Try and squeeze one in.
Oh, you will? Oh, that's wonderful. Let me know then, because we'll probably feature that. And John and Allison, maybe you would like to talk about the relay conversation that we are going to offer on FAC Week on the 75th anniversary of the UN Day.
Mm-hmm. Look, very, very quickly, I think most of you know the United Nations during 2020 has been inviting the world to take part in the biggest conversation ever, called hashtag UN75, where they're literally asking people to hold a dialogue and answer, their version of some very, very truly big questions. Now, they set out to do this middle of last year, and 2020 happened to all of us. So the interesting thing about this exercise is it really is authentically an opportunity to be helping shape the future that we are all going to be part of, not just in a recovery sense. So look, what we're doing is under the banner of UN75 on United Nations Day, really picking up that work and giving people an opportunity to take part in a dialogue, just a short 2-hour dialogue that they can host themselves, and to ask themselves and a group of their friends or peers or dare I say, clients that you'd like to get together for the first time around a table or around a video session, to ask them some leading questions that will be fed back to the United Nations and through them, of course, to national governments. So take part in that. People can go on to have a conversation in other after UN Day on October 24th, but it's a great opportunity to be part of a rolling one-day conversation across the world.
That's amazing. So I'm sharing here my screen with the number of featured events that we have in FAC Week, but there are already 87 events here registered. So this is going to be a tremendous learning opportunity for anyone that would like to be more proficient in group facilitation and understand how to work with groups. And I'm also surprised to know this is last minute that Judy is going to submit the session. So it will be great, Judy, if you can submit the session, because it's such a generous sharing of knowledge that you have done in here today with us, that I'm so thankful. And under this note, maybe I would like to ask you in the most cleanest possible way what you want to share as a final comment on this conversation.
This has been a really, really interesting conversation. Thank you.
Likewise.
It's been an honour to meet you, Judy.
Brilliant to meet you too. Great to talk, and thank you for staying up so late. For getting up so early.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, officially we are closing the broadcast. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to join us on FAC Week 19 from the 26th of October. We'll see you there.
We'll see you in FAC Week, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye for now.
Bye.